Hi, welcome to Christiana June. In my last video, I mentioned that I wanted to sort of talk about this design and kind of like the process behind the design and how I went about designing this dress through different versions. I thought about it and I felt maybe that wasn't the best way to deliver the message because I want anybody watching to kind of get helpful tips on how they can design using a photo inspiration or photo reference. So in this video, I will be sharing three helpful tips that you can use when designing from either a photo reference or using photo inspiration. So when it comes to photo inspirations, personally, I try as much as possible not to use anything closely related to fashion. I like using photo inspiration or photo references that are from other, disciplines like architecture, um, art, does something different from fashion so that I can come up with something that I feel is more authentic or more original. So when it comes to photo inspiration or photo references, the very first thing I'm trying to do, and a very good way to start, is to think about the photo and what exactly in the photo attracts you. When you do that, that kind of gives you a focus in the design process. So a very good example is this dress and this being the photo inspiration. When I saw the photo, the very first thing that came also like got my attention were the kind of like the blocks of colors in like that kind of like a mosaic type of pattern. That was what really, really caught my attention. So when I was thinking about what design I would come up with, I knew that mosaic design needed to be part of the design and ideally should be the focus of the design. Other things can sort of like catch your eye. I'm sure another fashion designer looking at this photograph, something else will catch their eye. For me, that was what got my attention. And that was something I was trying as much as possible during the thinking process to bring out in the design. Now, sometimes you may look at a photo inspiration or photo reference, and there's really nothing that really catches your eye. Something else you can do is to think about the elements in the picture and how you can interpret it. So I'll give an example. I have this design which is based on a floral photograph I saw on Pinterest. When I was obviously florals are very common in fashion, use a lot in fashion, and I knew that I needed to interpret the florals because there's really nothing that really. I mean, I did like the color. That was about it. But I also thought, okay, what else in this picture can I interpret into a garment or into an outfit? And the flowers. So for me, when I was thinking about the flowers in this picture and how to interpret it, instead of interpreting it in a very literal form or literal sense, so maybe making like a floral, using floral lace or trying to use floral applique or just instead of trying to be very literal, I began to think about flowers in terms of like their behavior, because the moment I began to do that, ideas I didn't consider started coming to me. So if you look at this particular design, you will see that it's very controlled and there's a release around like the skirt area, which is a very common silhouette. But I felt with this silhouette, I was more intentional than other designs. And when you see the controlled bodies and the release in the skirt, it does remind you of a flower blooming. And that was what I wanted to communicate with this design. I thought about flowers and not taking literally, but thinking about flowers and their behavior. How do they behave? When you think about flowers, they start off as a bud, and they obviously at some point they become like a full flower. So, for example, a rose. But I also looked at how I can interpret the bud of a rose, and that's where the neckline, the sort of like the keyhole on the neckline came about. So I think looking at it from a more, maybe from, I'll say less literally, allowed me to come up with a design that maybe I would have come up with if I was just trying to interpret the flowers in a very literal sense. So when you see a picture, you can think about the elements and thinking about how you can interpret them in a way that's not too literal, trying to think about what is specific about this element that I can interpret in form of clothes. The next tip is to understand that whatever you get initially may not be what you end up with at the end of the day. So this is where the entire story for this particular design comes in. So when I got this, when I was trying to interpret it, I definitely thought, yes, the mosaic kind of you know, pattern going on, but how will I interpret it? So obviously, if you look at this picture, there is a tree, and obviously the tree has got branches, and on the branches, the mosaic the pattern sits on it. So I just thought about like a jumpsuit, because that represents like the tree. I wanted something elongated that has like one continuous flow. It was between a jumpsuit and a long gown, but I just felt tree and jumpsuit are more like in my brain. So when I did that, initially this was actually a jumpsuit. So it was supposed to be a jumpsuit, and with the, obviously because the mosaic pattern was what attracted me, I decided to use that as a belt so that your eye immediately goes to it. So this was like the initial print, and obviously because the mosaic pattern was in kind of like asymmetrical way, I decided to go for an asymmetrical neckline. So that was the very first iteration. Then I decided that maybe, because then I was designing a lot of evening gowns, maybe this would do well as an evening gown. So that was where the overskirt part of it came in. But I think I did struggle with how to interpret it, and I did go through a number of like iterations, whether I should have sleeves or whether, you know, or whether it should be two-toned or something like that. Like there was quite a lot. I did do like a couple of test runs and kept it for a while before I eventually landed on the final design. So you can kind of see that it didn't come fully formed. It came like initially as that pencil sketch. So you can start off with something like a pencil sketch, but don't think that's the end of it. If there's more ideas or more inspiration that come to you while you are designing or while you're thinking about the design, by all means go and make changes. I still feel like that's the beauty about designing fashion. There's that space to be creative and to try new things. And if it doesn't work out, that's the worst that can happen. But just try new things and don't be afraid to iterate as a fashion designer. Okay, so that's 3 tips that can help you when you are designing using either a photo reference or photo inspiration. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comment section. And if you have any tips yourself and you would love to share in the comment section, I'm happy to read that. But until then, I will see you in my next video.